The story I'm going to share with you starts with a bang. A bang that is reminiscent of fireworks. A bang that shattered the silence of the night 6 years ago. And on that night, when the dust had settled, I was left, stained in red, left for dead. There was one bullet that sped through the night, with no eyes, but with sight. And that bullet hit its target, straight at its target. And when it hit its target, it damaged my face, my chest, and my shoulders. So you all heard that I'm Caron Asgarali. I'm retired on medical grounds. I'm a retired teacher. And just like many of you, I've been through difficulties and trials. I went through a divorce. I had a miscarriage. I had financial difficulties. And I also went through, like many of you might have, I've gone through a failed relationship. I had to lose my father 10 years ago to cancer, and as a result of that, I recognized that I had no support from the one person who I thought was in my corner. And I also, because of family misunderstanding, lost contact with my mother and my two brothers. My son was the only family support that I had for the next 3 years. But even with all those difficulties, it could never have prepared me for that night when I was shot and left like an empty shell. And that night, I had gone for a drive with a friend. So I wasn't driving my car, but it was my car. And we stopped at a minor road to turn onto a major road when the car was surrounded by bandits who had just finished a shooting spree. And they were looking for yet another getaway car. I happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And what happened was they shot at the driver, but inadvertently I moved and I picked up the bullet. And I have to say that fortunately I picked up the bullet, because had I not done that, the driver would have been shot, and probably today I would not be standing here. That bullet completely removed my chin. So where you are seeing a chin today, there was nothing. It damaged my chest and my shoulder. I was taken to the emergency room at the hospital after being transferred to a police car that was nearby. I cannot begin to tell you how I felt in that time between being shot and getting to the hospital. There were so many things that crossed my mind. There were questions like, believe it or not, ladies, but this is one of the first things that crossed my mind. How was I going to face the rest of the world with a deformed face? You know how we ladies are vain. You wake up with a pimple on your face and you're not going to work. So there I was wondering, how was I going to make it to work with what I thought at the time was going to be a scar? Little did I know that it was so much more than that. And strangely enough, in the instant that same thought crossed my mind, another thought crossed my mind. I wondered if it was worth living. Should I continue living? Should I just give up at this point in time? And I would have to say that God pushed that thought out of my mind, because I realized that if I did not react, or in fact if I did react, then what would happen is that I would lose a lot of energy that I should be saving just to save my life. So I just sat back like a dormouse and I started to think about so many different things. By the time I got to the hospital, people wanted to put me in a wheelchair. They wanted to lift me up and take me into the emergency room. But I had to be the stubborn, independent person that I had always been. I didn't know how much blood I had lost. I didn't know that I was going into thermal shock. I had no idea that half of my face was missing. And so I refused, and I got up and I walked into the emergency room, and I can still remember the expression on the faces of those people who were on the job that night. They were all shocked. And I have to share with you all that God really was with me that night. Because He had put people in place that night in that casualty room. My cousin was one of the doctors working that night in casualty, and it was only when she recognized me after a long time that they started to work on me. When I got into the emergency room, into the where they were doing surgery. Operating, thank you very much. When I got there, the anesthetist that night was a cousin of my son on his father's side. And the doctor doing the operation was my brother's friend from primary school days. So there were connections. And the 50+ people would like that, connections. So there were connections, and that made a difference. So I got up many hours after and found myself in ICU, connected to so many different pieces of medical apparatus, with tubes that seemed to be going into every single orifice, in addition to which they even had to create one that's called a tracheostomy, because what I didn't know too was that my tongue had become partially detached, so that I had to have a tracheostomy put in to keep the tongue in place to prevent me from being from suffocating on my own tongue. So what happened after leaving ICU was that for 3 weeks afterwards, I couldn't speak. For 9 months after the injury, I could not eat any solid foods. I had to have my jaws wired shut. And actually what happened was that it should have been wired shut almost immediately after the injury. But because of the amount of shrapnel that was embedded in my face, to prevent infection from setting in, they deferred from doing the wiring. And so what happened was my jaws started to heal, but they started to heal badly. They started collapsing inwardly. And so 3 weeks after the incident, my jaw had to be rebroken and then wired shut. 1 month after that, they removed the wires in the hope that my jaw had begun to heal properly. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. So I had to have my jaw rebroken a 3rd time before being rewired, before undergoing reconstructive and plastic surgery. Now, all of this took about 9 months, and what happened after the major physical recuperation period and all the surgeries was that it was only at that point everything hit me. And I started to suffer with flashbacks and nightmares and episodes of crying, sleeping too much, not sleeping, not wanting to see anybody, withdrawing from things that I like to do. And I recognized that I was going through depression, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And at that point, I sought medical and professional help because I knew I needed it. But you know something? Viktor Frankl, who is a Holocaust survivor, said that everything can be taken away from a man, but one thing. And that one thing is choosing the right attitude. And so even though at the age of 47, almost everything had been taken away from me, I was left with a choice. I had to make a choice to adopt a negative attitude and give up, or to choose a positive attitude, which is what I did, and to push forward with determination, with passion, with purpose, with commitment, and with faith. And that's what I chose to do. And so, late 2013, what I did was I shifted the focus away from myself, and I did what I had always done in the past, and which was to look after other families during my time of crisis at Christmas time. So that Christmas, when I had already lost my job, lost my car, lost all my life savings in surgery, I still did what I had always done before. And I made sure that 4 families who I did not know and who I still don't know got hampers at Christmas. And you know what was nice about that? What was nice about that is that I thought I was helping them, but in truth and in fact, they helped me a lot more, because they helped me to shift the focus away from the pain that I was feeling. After that, things improved. And in 2014, just 1 year after the incident, I wrote and published my first book, From Lion to Lamb, A Spiritual Journey, that's based on the incident. And that came about because when I couldn't speak, I had to write to communicate. And in writing to communicate, I realized that I could write as a form of therapy. And then from that, I realized that I could write to share a message of hope. And that was what I took this negative incident and I turned it into something about transforming all of my hurt into hope. Hope for myself and hope for others. And so after that first book, I published 2 more books. The second book was a prayer book, and the third book is called Bounce Back Better, 10+1 Key Steps for Building Resilience. And that book really was a summary of all the steps that I took to heal after this major change in my life. In 2015, I took part in my first half marathon. And that might seem like something unimportant, but for me that was a big step. Because what it showed me was that I had the grit, the determination, the commitment, and the conviction to accomplish any goal. In 2017, I started Project RARE, raising awareness on the ripple effect of gun violence, advocating for peace and against violence. And that really was something that took off. And it took off only because of a lot of hard work, a whole lot of faith and commitment. And using Project RARE, I've been able to share this message of hope with so many people that I could never have imagined before the incident that I'd be able to touch so many lives. And in 2017, June, Project RARE was able to be represented in South Africa at a conference on resilience. And I'm proud to say that I was the only Trinidadian and also the only West Indian present at that. In 2018, Project RARE hosted a conference on gun violence entitled Beyond the Bullet in collaboration with UTT's Department of Criminology and Public Safety. And also in 2018, I was recognized by the BBC as one of their nominees for a program called Outlook Inspirations. And that nomination came about as a big surprise to me because it was somebody hearing me speaking at an event, and that person secretly nominated me for it. So I was one of the 20 international nominees. I didn't make it to the top 3, but that was okay for me because I think for a small island like us to make it to the top 20 internationally was a big deal. So while I could never have prepared for something like being shot to happen to me, I have to say that, like the Apostle Paul said, we may be troubled on every side, yet not distressed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, cast down, but not destroyed. So regardless of whatever we may be going through, we all have different circumstances. Nobody's own is worse or better than anybody else's own. We have to deal with our own circumstances, but no matter what, the Apostle Paul tells us that God is always there, no matter what burdens we have to bear. And so as I leave you all this evening, I want to remind you of 3 points to empower me. Empower me through practicing philanthropy, being of service to others. Empower me by building supportive, worthwhile networks and relationships. Support me by having faith in God. And the last thing I want to leave with you is, regardless of your circumstance, whatever trial you may have to bear, what choice are you going to make? Are you going to choose to give up? Or are you going to choose to adopt a positive attitude, hold on to your faith, and walk with God? Thank you.